I know. Oh.
All right, 12:30. Hello, women's health students. We got everybody here. Let me take a gallery look, kind of see what we've got going on. All right, plan today is just to introduce the book. I know everybody has read the preface at this point. If you've got the bandwidth, if I can see your faces, so I can see people as we go through this, that would be fantastic, instead of seeing blocks. Okay, so my politics are out there in the open and are not at all like hidden in all of this. And so I can let you know that in the previous election, I was absolutely devastated. I was really hoping we would have our first woman, Hillary Rodham Clinton, as our first female president. And I was very shocked and surprised at what happened in the election. And me and my friends were kind of mourning what happened, and we decided to go as a group to the Women's March in Washington, D.C. And we went. And after we did the march, which I thought was very inspiring, and we were driving home, Beth was driving and I was kind of riding, I started collecting the words that people had on their signs as they marched. And I found the words on the signs to be quite inspiring. And I felt very much like I needed to do something. And I didn't know what to do other than vote, call my representatives, all the stuff that I had been doing previously. I felt like I needed to do more. Okay, backing up, two of my friends, Doctors Doris Bazzini and Lisa Curtin, we had written a chapter together on Fat Talk for a compilation book called Encyclopedia of Body Image, and very much enjoyed working on that chapter, sort of writing about the research and working on that. Okay, so I'm done with the Women's March. I'm back teaching. I feel like I need to do something more, but I don't know what. And then just out of the blue one day, after I taught my health psychology class, a student came up to me and said, my partner works for a publishing company, and we were looking at your website, and we are wondering, do you have any interest in submitting a proposal to write a book? And so it just fell into my lap. Like it just happened serendipitously, fell into my lap. And it was one of those things where like I'd never done anything like this before, but as I got to thinking about it and I got to working on the proposal, and then I got to meet the associate editor over at McFarland, then it came to be. It came to be. And it took me 2 years to complete it. It took me a year to complete it, wait for the review. We'll talk about the review here in a bit. And then it took me quite a while to address the reviews. Okay, this is my crew up here. This is all the gals. We were up there for the march, which was really cool. I love this sign. I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm now changing the things I cannot accept. And you will see that each chapter of the book starts with a quote from the Women's March that has some relevancy for the content in the book. Okay, I am not going to go through all of these slides, and I think Emma's presenting that clip on Thursday, so I'm not going to play that. So I've referred to fat talk and body snarking as our feminine enemies because the fat talk tends to harm us and others. The body snarking certainly tends to harm certain individuals. And so let's get this definition down. And I know you all read about this in the preface. But fat talk's a communication exchange that focuses on individuals' physical appearance, especially critical dialogue about body shape, style, or fitness. There's a movement nowadays in the literature for people to call this appearance talk, because there's some concern that the term fat talk adds to fat stigma. And there's going to be a chapter in the book that talks a lot about obesity, large bodies, and fat stigma, and what a pernicious problem that is, particularly for women in our culture. But I have kept the term. I did not coin the term. Dr. Mimi Nichter, who is an anthropologist, she coined the term. She wrote a book on Fat Talk, What Mothers and Daughters Say to One Another. And she did that research, and she wrote that book based on all these interviews that she had done with middle school girls, first white middle school girls, and then she got extra grant money and was able to do focus group research with Black middle school girls. She did that research, wrote that book, and then just never did anything else on Fat Talk after that. And so me and my students in my lab, we were calling this thing the social psychology of body image, because social psychology has to do with our interactions and our relationships. And we were kind of conceptualizing as it's like this personal body image that keeps leaking out in conversation, usually with other women. So the social psychology of body image is not a very sexy term. Fat Talk, when we landed on this and realized Mimi Nichter had coined this, we're like, oh, that's the term. That's a much better term to be using for this type of work. So that's how we got to that. Now, I will, as we go through this book and these topics, I have stated in the preface that I'm including Fat Talk to mean any kind of appearance talk. Okay, so it's not just about bodily fat. It can be anything. It can be about hair, skin, anything. Okay, body snarking is when individuals are cutting down other individuals, usually women. So they're rudely talking about their body parts, whether in private or directly to the person, can be snide comments about other women's bodies or parents. Practice of dissecting other women's bodies down. This is one of the things in the media that I absolutely can't stand, is when there are pictures of not total women, but pictures of body parts. And oftentimes just sort of dissecting and saying, well, she's got great but doesn't have great, that kind of stuff. I can't stand when I see that being done. Mean or vicious comments about others. And so this is really a form of aggression. And in many situations, it hijacks whoever the target woman is, it hijacks her power. But I'm going to present to you a couple of role models in the media who I definitely look up to, who have not tolerated this when they've been the target of this kind of stuff. They absolutely haven't targeted it. So one way I think about this, I feel that it definitely fuels sexism. It fuels and reinforces misogyny, which is the hate of women. And so one way of thinking about it is, how on earth are we going to achieve equality when society allows people to treat women this way? Okay. Questions here? How many got you? Okay, don't worry about that. Let's not worry about that. Okay. I want to give you a little bit of a history of the feminist movement. Some of you may be more woke to this than others, but feminism is when we're advocating for political, economic, and social equality. And of course, it is about equality between men and women. But usually when you are a part of a marginalized group, you tend to have more empathy and sympathy for other marginalized groups. And so along with this, I would say, pushing for equality for LGBTQ plus, pushing for equality of people of different races, pushing for equality for people that have intersectionality, where they cross over multiple marginalized groups at once. If we go back, I mean, y'all could look this stuff up, but we look at the US Constitution, it still has the wording, he shall be chosen, he shall exercise. It's still written with all he and not we or she, or then some people don't even like the binary of male and female. And then the correct way to correct that grammatically would be Z. So ZE, so not she, not he, but Z, meaning it could relate to both. This goes way back in time. Let's talk about the Bible here and what happened in Genesis. So most of you all know this story that, and I find it fascinating that it was Eve's fault. And I find it fascinating that Eve got hungry and she ate an apple, and then now we are all sinners. Eve got hungry, she ate food, she nourished. Okay. So Eve ate the apple, she ate the forbidden fruit, and then she tempted her husband. She gave it to Adam to eat. And then because of that, there's the fall of man and the original sin. And somewhere I can tell you that the acceptance and commitment therapy individuals like to quote Genesis and the story of Adam and Eve, because they say it is the way that we as human beings, in the story that got written in the Bible, we as human beings have been wrestling with why human beings suffer throughout all of humankind. Does that make some sense? And it's a story about original sin. It's a story explaining why individuals suffer. Okay. And then the acceptance and commitment therapy people would say that human suffering is a natural part of life. Okay. And that's where the acceptance piece comes into it. The commitment is commitment for change to make one's life better. The acceptance piece is that there will be negative emotions, there will be some suffering. That is a fact of life. Okay. Okay, so this as an explanation for why humans suffer definitely has sexist components to it. Would you agree? Okay. And then the part about the fact that she was tempted and she was hungry and she ate an apple fits a little bit into these stereotypes. We talked about this when we talked about women's sexuality, that we're not supposed to have drives. We're not supposed to be hungry. We're not supposed to be thirsty. We're not supposed to be sexual. We're not supposed to have emotional needs. And again, all that stuff that makes us humans. Okay. In modern language, some of the sexism that still remains, and again, this is call for feminism, we call history, his story. So whenever I see something really cool happen with a woman, I like to say she's making her story, her story, right? So even when we talk about this whole field of history, we oftentimes see, mankind instead of humankind. We see manpower. I have really had to work on this one. My mom for a while even worked for a company called Manpower, and it was a temporary agency type of thing where she recruited temps and sent them out into different businesses. The IO psychologists have taught me, and I've been working on this one, human resources. Okay, so not manpower, human resources. So there's a lot of the gendered nature of language that still exists in the English language. In other languages, my daughter-in-law, for instance, is from France, and she and I've had conversations about, I had French in high school, but just about every noun in French is gendered as even feminine or masculine, le or la. And so they've really got deep gendered language in French. Questions about the definition of feminism as a political movement, or would anybody like to add something to this? Anybody have more to add? I don't want to leave anything out. Okay. I'm moving your pictures around. Sorry. Trying to find the right place to put y'all. Okay. So one of the things that I learned as I started doing research for background for working on this book is that there are a lot of scientists that do not believe in political movements. So there are a lot of scientists out there who do not believe in feminism. Okay. And what I learned is there are a lot of feminists who own science, but there are a lot of feminists, particularly that really dislike evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology. Okay. And I can tell you all that when, first of all, I went through a draft of the book and I got my chapters in there and I felt like I said everything I wanted to say. And then I realized that under the contract that I was under in McFarland, that the number of words that I had in my manuscript weren't even reaching 30% of what I needed. And I panicked and I was like, oh my gosh, I have said everything I want to say. What am I going to do to expand this? Particularly because I felt like in every section, in every content section, I scoured the scientific literature and I had already reviewed it. And what I ended up doing over time, and I hope this smooths out the story that is told in each chapter, but I went back and I tried to narrate better. And so there was the science, but I tried to like tell the story and narrate a lot more. Okay. After I had said everything I needed to say. I had reviewed all of the scientific literature I felt like I needed to do. I felt like I had narrated the best I could to make it more appealing to people who weren't just reading this for scientific purposes. Then I sent it back to McFarland, and they sent it out for blind peer review. Okay. And in blind peer review, it goes to experts in the field. They review it, and the blind part is they write up a critical review of what they think is good, what they think is bad, what they think needs to be changed or modified. And then they send it back to, in this case, the publisher. And then the publisher sends back the reviews to the author or authors. In this particular situation, I have had some painful reviews in my scientific work in my day. I've even shed a tear or so in my day. But when I got the reviews back after keep in mind, I had worked on this thing for a year, and I work very obsessively. Like I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I couldn't stop working on it. It wasn't like I could like put it down and, work it on it on Mondays, but not necessarily over the weekend. So I get the reviews back, and two things are evident from these two people that I don't know who they are. Very strong feminists who absolutely loathe evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology. And keep in mind, that's in chapter 1 of the book. So the very first thing that they read about was this scientific field that they absolutely hate. One of them even said, feminism can move forward on the day that evolutionary psychology and biology die. Okay. Now, in hindsight, one of the things that I wish that I had done is put the cultural chapter, which is chapter 2, first, and put the one that has the evolutionary stuff in it second, to like try to pull a reader in. Because a lot of times with the cultural stuff, it's like it's all around us, like we know it. Like, when we played with Barbies, we watched, Disney princesses, growing up, that kind of thing, or dressed up like princesses for Halloween, that type of thing. I wish I'd put the cultural one first before the evolutionary psychology and biology. So then I had a dilemma. Oh, when I got those reviews, it felt like, and again, after years worth of work, I felt like I got punched in the gut. And I was immobilized for a while. It was like, what am I going to do with this? These reviewers absolutely hate this. And I could tell from the stuff that they critiqued, it was all the evolutionary stuff and none of the other stuff. I think they both stopped reading after chapter 1. Got it? So all this other stuff that I had done, it's like, okay, I really got no feedback on it. Punched in the gut, immobilized. And then I was like, okay, do I just remove that chapter and pretend like all of that stuff doesn't exist? And I couldn't in good conscience, because it was very much akin to me, like people who deny climate change, or people who deny human involvement and the science on how human involvement has affected climate change. There are people that disbelieve that or ignore that. And I felt like as a scientist, I can't ignore something that important. Okay. Nowadays, you all have lived through this in the pandemic. You've got people that are denying that COVID exists. They're denying that people have died of it. I heard a story recently where a person I know lost a good friend who went to the hospital with coronavirus, and they died, but they didn't die of COVID. They died of pneumonia. And it was one of those like, I felt like I was putting my hands on my head, like, okay, that's the story that's being told. Got it? They went in sick with that virus, and like even people don't die of cancer, they die of complications from cancer. So this person's even sort of telling this story of like, but they died of something else. Isn't that weird? They caught something else while they were in the hospital and died of something else. And then you've got people who are refusing to wear masks, right? Stuff like that. So just sort of denying what we know in the science. I couldn't in good conscience do that. So what I decided to do was try to wrestle with the scientist in me and the feminist in me. And I tried to make that work in creating, as I wrote about different topics, trying to create tension. Okay, most of us like to run away from I'm not particularly fond of conflict myself, interpersonal conflict, that kind of thing. And most of us like to run away from that. But from a teaching standpoint, and I hope that we're able to use this some this semester, I tried to make the tension evident because I think it stirs up thought. And my hopes is it'll stir up conversation and discussion in our class. So any questions about that? Okay. The good thing that came out of the very critical reviews that where they really disliked evolutionary science, was that it made me try to do a better job at explaining things and explaining how the evidence of the science is still modern, is obviously there. It's ubiquitous and obviously there. But I felt like I had to do it more thoroughly. Okay. And I can let you all know that as we move into this, I'm not gonna go into detail about a lot of this content because you all are going to be doing that as you go through the chapters and you present the content for your presentations. But there's a lot of stuff in the science, in the evolutionary science, that I dislike as a feminist. Okay. I dislike it, but I feel like I can't deny it, if that makes some sense. Okay. One example here, and this is going to come back around here in a little bit when I talk about Disney princesses. One of the things that we have found, and I know this is going to be presented on Thursday in class, so I don't want to harp too much on it. But a lot of heterosexual men tend to be attracted to women that have a waist to hip ratio on average of 0.7, meaning that waist is a bit smaller than their hips. And there are all kinds of evolutionary, biological, and psychological reasons for that, that signal fertility, signal her fertility, signal that she's not pregnant by somebody else, signal that she's fertile and can produce children. And again, so much of the evolutionary biology and psychology is all about our mate selection, and is all about trying to create for successful in humankind, successful reproduction and raising of children. Okay. Any questions here before we move on? Okay. So does it make sense, the not liking it, but still feeling like it needs to be appreciated? Can y'all kind of understand? Can I see some heads moving? Okay, cool. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go into detail with that. Chapter 2 really delves into culture, and talks about how, and even existing still today, how we've got all these cultural influences that do girls and women a disservice. But I want to come back to the waist to hip ratio here. Oh, and our fashion models, I think this is just really interesting. And we've moved away from the really skinny, almost like looking like heroin addict kind of fashion models, and we've moved into more curves and more musculature more recently in history. But I found it really interesting that when we had these really skinny, tall fashion models, they are, when you look at the gene pool in women's body shapes, they are anomalies, like less than 2%. Of fashion models, they're in the leanest 2% of women. So we take this thing that is not at all common, and very weirdly we go, I'm going to take this thing that's not at all common, that if we did the normal bell curve would be very, very deviant on the tail end. And then we herald it. We put it up there and we go, okay, this really weird genetic type is what we're all supposed to look like. which is ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous when I think about it that way. And then I've got in here like that 2% of people are born with an extra finger, usually as babies. That's why moms and dads tend to count babies' fingers and toes. You know, I've heard that ritual of counting, right? It's because about 2% of the time a baby comes out with extra fingers and extra toes. And then nowadays, they're usually surgically removed. Okay. Okay. Nowadays, also, we've got these influencers. I learned a lot about the Kardashians when I was researching and writing this book, where I really didn't know, I knew of them, but I really didn't know much about them. And so I learned a lot about that. Okay, these are some of my role models. Amy Schumer, who I think is hilarious. She has pushed back. She's one of those role models as a comedian who has pushed back against this. And she was filmed and clipped, I think, when she was on vacation in Hawaii. And in this situation, she was featured without her written permission in Glamour. I think y'all know what Glamour is. It's a women's magazine. She was featured in an issue on plus sizes. Okay. And she's not a plus size. She says here, plus size is 16 in America. I go between a size 6 and an 8. This magazine put me in their plus size online issue without asking or letting me know. It doesn't feel right to me. Young girls seeing my body type and thinking that's plus size. What are your thoughts? And so they're critiquing her, but then also using her celebrity without her permission. And then Emma Watson, that most of you all know as Hermione, who, what I think is wonderful about Watson is she's a lot like the character that, you know, Hermione portrayed in Harry Potter. Very smart, precocious, very caring about others. It seems like that's who she is as a person also. She's a proclaimed feminist, and when she posed, this was what her stylist and her photographer and her makeup artist, how she was dressed for promotion of Beauty and the Beast. And a reporter criticized her for being a feminist, and then her response to that, being a feminist and showing her cleavage. That's what the reporter complained about. Like, how can you show parts of your female body and pose that way and call yourself a feminist? And I loved her response. She was like, feminism's about giving women a choice. It's not a stick to with which we beat other women with. It's about freedom. It's about liberation. It's about equality. Another aspect that I feel like was critiqued here is, I think a lot of people think Hermione Granger should not be a sexual being, and Emma Watson as a young adult was portraying herself in a way that she felt comfortable with, but obviously there's a kind of a sexual component to it, and I think that was threatening for some individuals. Have you all heard about these stories? These attacks on people in media? I'm seeing a little bit of head nodding. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious if this was new to many of you. Okay, I'm moving y'all around again, trying to see some faces again. Okay.
I feel like it's hard too when you're like constantly in a spotlight to have all that attention. I just feel like it draws to you more for criticism and whatnot.
Yeah, and you know what's so unfortunate about it, and again, this is coming from a feminist perspective, is that men are rarely treated this way, whether they're politicians, comics, actors. Women just get treated in ways that are very different than the way men get treated. And I find that to be just very painful and unfair. But you're right. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of times they're just trying to do their craft. You know, they're trying to do their craft, and you know, they've got PR people working with them. They're trying to brand themselves so that they can continue to work and get more jobs, get more movies, or get more gigs, or whatever, or get reelected if they're a politician. Any other thoughts, comments about the body snarking? It goes further. I'll touch on this a teeny bit. Okay, here's where I got my little measurement device, my little measuring tape out, and I started doing measurements. So when I saw Frozen, I made myself watch Frozen because my boys were grown. There was no watching Frozen with them. But I had so many people in my life, particularly with little girls, and I kept hearing about this movie. I'm like, okay, I got to make myself go watch this movie, find out what it's all about. And it was being heralded as the first Disney movie that was feminist in nature, or the first feminist fairy tale, the most progressive movie ever. So I go and get my little measuring tape out because as I'm watching this movie, I'm thinking, okay, these are white girls. And I kind of liked that they were strong. You know, I appreciated that. That was nice to see in a Disney movie. They were the lead characters. They were strong. One of them talks the other one from out of not getting married to this dude who ends up being not so nice a guy. I'm like, okay, I can relate to that. Their waist to hip ratio, remember the average that heterosexual men tend to find attractive is 0.7, 0.55. They've got these teeny little hands and these big, huge eyes and this very, very long hair and these teeny tiny waists that are absolutely biologically impossible. Got it? So again, first feminist fairy tale, but what is the message that is out there? Okay. And it's certainly been critiqued as being, you know, heteronormative in nature. And then I've got a quote in there, not from me, but somebody else. Disney still has a long way to go to promote egalitarian, diverse representations of all gender. Okay. Has everybody in here seen Frozen? Most of you. Okay. Okay. Ooh, let's watch this. Okay, this is just for fun. Whoops, it disappeared. Go back.
The thigh gap. One of human evolution's greatest mysteries. When we see something like the thigh gap in human evolution, we need to ask ourselves, why? Historically speaking, the thigh gap pops up about the same time that yoga pants are introduced to the colony. It became a kind of mass cultural delusion, engaging in the idolatry of nothingness, uttering strange incantations like gap, gap.
I studied the thigh gap in its natural habitat, trying to understand what function it serves. Turns out, none. It's actually bad for balance and your pussy gets cold.
So why did this stupid thing become a popular stupid thing? One speculation is sexual selection. Perhaps it was attractive to males in the tribe.
This idea runs contrary to their extensively documented interest in dad ass. A woman with a thigh gap could not have the proper amount of junk in the trunk. I'm sorry.
Another problem here, and this is where it gets really, really cool, is that if women evolved less muscle over time, it stands to reason they would need more protection from predators, right? But if you look at the evolution of men over time, it's not likely they can provide any protection at all. So how did this arbitrary measure of bone structure become a standard of beauty? I don't know. We're not scientists. We're just the History Channel.
Okay, again, just for fun. Could y'all see that, or are you just hearing it? You can see it? Okay. Yeah, this when I heard about this one, there's even on one of the eating disorder scales, there's an item that, well, there's two items that I can remember that sort of relate to this, and how some women get hung up about their thighs and worry about their thighs. But one of the items is, it concerns me when I sit on the toilet how my thighs spread. Because they flatten because you're sitting on the toilet if you're looking down. And another one of the items on the eating disorder body image scale is when I stand, I dislike it if my thighs are touching. And for so many individuals, including my body style, like that is normal. It is just very normal for thighs to touch when standing. And so this is just one of those things where there are some women that are getting really, really upset about not having a thigh gap when it is just like not a natural genetic structure for most people. Okay. So I like the fact that they kind of treated it like an anthropological thing. Okay. I do want to talk a little bit, and there's a chapter in the book that's going to go into great detail talking about socioeconomic status and culture and how we tend to have rather different values in the United States for lower SES individuals, so less education and less income, relative to like middle class and upper class individuals, even so much so that the divide has grown in socioeconomic status and has rolled in politics. So one way of thinking about it is many of the individuals who voted for Biden-Harris differ in SES demographics than many of the individuals that were Trump followers, as an example. Okay. And it's fascinating to me on some level how what is expected in female beauty even differs based on socioeconomic status. Now, let me put this into some context. And I've got in here, here's a picture. I found this so cute when I was in Mexico. This is a picture in the elevator. I don't know what, I don't read Spanish, so I don't know what they're saying. But what I absolutely loved down here was the little Mexican family. And I found it fascinating that the little kids were portrayed as chubbier. And one way of thinking about our ideals in different cultures, in countries that are developing countries, that are poorer countries, as an example, Mexico, a person raises their social status by being able to get fat themselves and to be able to feed their kids enough food so that their kids can get chubby. And the reason for that is it is a way of showing other people, I've got the money. I've got the money to buy the food so that I can be well nourished and my kids can be well nourished. Does that make some sense? So in poorer countries, showing your status is showing your ability to get plenty of food and to eat and feed your families. Interestingly, in industrialized countries, so this would be the United States, this would be our sister countries like England, Germany, Sweden, that type of thing. In industrialized countries, where on average people tend to be more middle and upper class, people show their, and where food is more available, there's plenty of money and food is more available, then oftentimes people rise in their social status by their ability to decline food, to restrict food, decline food, go to the gym and work out a lot. Isn't it interesting that what gets heralded as ideals translate through one's money, one's ability to eat a lot or not eat a lot, and then show up in one's body, and then signal to people certain things? Okay, so when we think about, let's think about in US culture and think about maybe some women that get heralded in the media. Being lean and then working out on a regular basis connotes what about her? Give me some personality traits that would go along with that. So think of a celebrity, Meghan Markle, she was interviewed by Oprah this weekend. Kate, what's the other one in England? Kate Middleton. Who else do we want to take? Who else? US actresses, maybe. So what personality traits or attributes do we give to a woman who's lean and works out?
I don't know if this is necessarily always true, but I think kind of being like thin or fit sometimes is kind of associated like with like the popular girl or whatever.
Okay, thank you, Allison. And would we keep going if we kept going with some of those attributes? She's disciplined, smart, helping her get popular.
Yeah, kind of like has everything going for her, like the picture perfect type girl.
which is not necessarily the case. I mean, one of the privileges I've had in clinically working with people with eating disorders is I've worked with a lot of very lean, seems like got it all together individuals who are so miserable inside, who are just so miserable. And so one of the things that we work towards in therapy is trying to be authentic, you know, in one's self, in one's personality, and help grow past that being miserable type of thing. But yeah, so we've got all these different kinds of attributes or stereotypes that we give to these individuals. But we're going to talk more about socioeconomic status in the United States as we go through the book. Okay. I'm not going to talk about obesity. I got to move pictures around here for a second. No, I don't think I'm going to go into this. You all will go into this, and feel free when you all, because I posted this PowerPoint up on As You Learn, feel free if you want to borrow from any of these kinds of things, but this will give you an idea as you look through your chapter or your chapter portions, the kind of things that I would like for you to glean from that and present to your classmates. And one of the things I would love to see you do is not only sort of review the content of what you're seeing in your chapters. Feel free to bring in other content if you want to, if there's other stuff, particularly like culturally going on that you think would be relevant. But do try to present like the research methodology for at least one study that you cover, because I think that's good scientific learning, is sort of seeing how different types of research methodologies can ask questions in different ways and can collect data and answer questions in different ways. And the book definitely presents a variety of different research methodologies. So please consider that as you go through your book. I do want to talk a little bit right here about, there were a lot of things that I landed on as I was doing my research and writing this that absolutely abhorred me. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this stuff is out there influencing individuals. I had heard from my eating disorder clients about pro-Ana websites at one point in time, and then asking my clients, like, what are those about? And they were like, oh, we look it up to get inspiration, or it's, you know, a bunch of thin women and it, you know, it feeds into the eating disorder. And I have learned over time with any of my clients, I now assess for how much social media they consume. I think of it in a lot of ways of like watching too much of the news. Like if you were watched a news channel 24/7, you would think the world's coming to an end and, you know, might as well curl up on the floor in the fetal position and cry. But that's the kind of effect that overconsumption of social media can have on people also. Okay. It's got a net effect at times of making people feel bad about themselves. So anyways, I learned about pro-Ana. Pro-Me is more pro-bulimia. There are sites with Skinny Girl as an example, where you had to send in pictures of your body in order to be allowed to be initiated into the group. You had to be skinny enough to be a part of the group. I found it really sad when I learned about how some of the Kardashians, after their bodies developed, how some of these people in these websites or these social media groups turned on them. You know, at one point in time, they were heralded and then turned on them when their bodies developed. All kinds of different ways that people, particularly women, can be mean to other women in this situation. Had y'all heard of these kinds of social media sites? I'm saying some say no, some say yeah. They're out there. Okay, I'm not going to go into this. Whoever has that chapter, let's talk about social comparison. The ecological momentary assessment, I've never done any of this in my research. I would love to get to it at some point in time. It is a way of collecting data and learning about behavior from individuals with this continuous monitoring. So in the old days, researchers would give people pagers, and every now and then the pager would beep and the person would pick up their phone and call in the pager number, and they would talk about what they were just doing. So it's a way of collecting data on your behavior right after it happens. Nowadays, the way that researchers do this is they will program an app, and when people consent to participate in their study, they will download their app, and then their phone every now and then. So like in this particular study, what would happen is every now and then the phone would send a alert, and you're supposed to pay attention to the alert and then fill out a tiny little survey. And so as an example, it would be, within the last hour, have I engaged in fat talk? Within the last hour, was I on social media looking at other people's bodies and admiring their bodies or their appearance? In the last hour, was I working out? In the last hour, was I applying makeup or doing my hair or something like that? So it's a beautiful way of collecting real-time data. So instead of having people self-report, you know, like in the last month, I did this, it's a great way of collecting ongoing data. And they have found in this research, and somebody's going to talk about this more in this class, the more that people, particularly women, compare themselves to others and ask the question, am I as pretty as her? Am I as thin as her? Am I as beautiful as her? The more people do that kind of comparison, the worse their body image and the more vulnerable they are to eating disorders and depression. Okay. Does that make some sense? Particularly if they do this thing called upward social comparison. So upward social comparison, I still remember working with a teenager who had an eating disorder, and we were doing some mirror exposure work, and we were trying to figure out how to make her looking at herself in the mirror more anxiety producing, because when you're doing exposure work, you want as high as amount of anxiety as you can get. And she was very clever. She's like, oh, I know. And I think it was Kendall. She's like, oh, let me pull up this picture of Kendall Jenner. And so she pulls up the picture. I'm introduced to Kendall Jenner. I'm like, oh, that's Kendall Jenner. I've heard of her, hadn't seen her. And then we position the computer in a way, you can get clever in therapy sometimes. We position the computer and the screen in the way that as my client was looking at her body image in the mirror, she could see Kendall looking at her. And that was very threatening. And I still remember like processing it, like, okay, who is this person? And you follow her and you admire her and all this kind of stuff. And she's like, oh yeah, she's so lean and beautiful and blah, blah. And her hair's always perfect and her makeups are always perfect. And I was like, okay, let's, wait a minute here. Because my client was really thinking that Kendall Jenner rolled out of bed in the mornings, and if she took a selfie or somebody took a photograph of her, that's what she looked like, and it got posted on social media. And she failed to kind of think through, like, no, this is a woman who has a stylist. She has a makeup artist. She has a hairstylist. She has a professional photographer. She has a public relations person. The photographer probably took hundreds of pictures, and they decided this is the one that she liked the most of her, that made her look the best. And then it got posted on social media as an influencer. Okay. And a lot of times we don't think through all that, right? Like, that's not what people look like in Walmart, right? So doesn't it make sense that people do a lot of that upward social comparison? That does the most psychological damage to them. Make some sense? Okay. And again, I'm kind of randomly going through some of this stuff. I learned a lot about Thinspo, Thinspiration, some other hashtags where people post to try to inspire them to be better people, whether that mean get leaner, get more muscular, get their hair a certain way, all kinds of different things that people can kind of follow. Okay, I'm not going to go into that. I found it interesting. I've already talked about how I really dislike when women's body parts, as opposed to women as whole human beings. We're not just body parts, we're like all put together. I found it interesting when there have been different researchers that have studied what these images that get posted on some of these Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts and social media, like for Thinspiration or Inspiration or Pro Anna or that kind of stuff. A lot of times what women are posting are body parts that go all the way back to that evolutionary biology. They are showing, as an example, frequently their pelvis, their abdomen, their thighs, the body parts that are connoting the fertility. Okay. You don't, for an example, see many women posting body parts in social media like of their feet or the back of their neck, right? So it's like this sexual or the fertility aspects. So it can be very damaging. Okay, so here are some of the ways, as I've tried to kind of comprehend what is Fat Talk all about and why is it ongoing and why is it not ending? Why does it trickle down generations? And one way of thinking about Fat Talk is expressing how US bodies are moving away from the cultural thin ideal. So in the chapter where we talk about larger bodies and we talk about obesity, women in our culture are at an all-time high in body size. So interestingly, we've got these really thin ideals that we herald, but more and more women personally, their bodies are moving away from those ideals. Given that, could Fat Talk be a way that they're acknowledging, like, I know this is the ideal. I know that my body isn't that ideal. So in my fat talking, I'm acknowledging that I know that, kind of acknowledging one's flaws. Another way of thinking about it, and this is where I kind of come up with that short-term reinforcement, long-term punishment, that addiction kind of thing, as Fat Talk being a way to feel better about feeling bad about one's body. So if I feel bad about my body, my friend's here with me, she feels bad about her body. If we fat talk back and forth with one another, we're just acknowledging, yeah, we share this common thing. We share this thing where we both feel bad about our bodies. So another definition of fat talk. As well as when we get into the socioeconomic status thing, another way of thinking about fat talk is it's a way to express body ideals and a way to express group identity. So Dr. Mimi Nichter, who coined the term fat talk, one of the 5 functions she had for fat talk was a way of placing oneself into one's in-group, one's friendship group, but then sort of saying, but there's that group and we are not them. And so as a way of kind of acknowledging a certain identity. And it's no wonder you're going to see on the chapter on race that white girls and white women do this a lot more than girls and women of color in US culture. Okay. And then when men do this, when men engage in, even there's a male fat talk scale and it's got 2 factors on it. It's got fat talk, which is more likely we're going to see that kind of stuff in older men who like have built a beer gut kind of thing. The other factor on the male scale is muscularity talk. Okay, so guys are going to talk, they end up talking, when they talk about their appearance, they talk a lot more about their working out, their muscularity, wanting to be bigger. I know my older son does a lot of working out. My younger son's, he's healthy and he exercises, but he's not as obsessed with it as my older son. But even my older son was like, you know, when he was a teenager, was like, it was legs day, mom, it was legs day, you know, it was arms day. And that's how guys kind of talk about, like, when they work out certain areas of their body in their strength training kind of stuff. So any thoughts on this, of just ways of kind of defining and conceptualizing the why behind the fat talk and what it's doing? Anybody have any other thoughts of any other ways of kind of conceptualizing the why? Okay. We're going to get into, this is much more health psychology related, and I think this is chapter 5, but we're going to get more into that socioeconomic status and ways that, the way I conceptualize it, people in our culture bifurcate. that the poor engage in behaviors that make a lot of sense for their environments, but it's behavior in ways that make them less healthy. And then middle class, upper class people with more education, more money, more resources, they oftentimes engage in behavior in a way that helps keep them healthier. Okay. And so one's education and one's income is very, very powerful predictor of the way people in the United States tend to lead their lives. And particularly in the ways that we talked about this a little bit already in this class, but the ways that people eat. Okay. And then I even found, this was fascinating research for me as I was kind of consuming this and writing about it. We talked about this in the class already, but even the closer fast food restaurants are to public schools, the larger the children are in those school systems. So the closer the fast food, because those kids oftentimes get out of school and they go grab the fast food. Okay, so I'm going to talk about evolutionary biology and psychology interacting with culture. And so one way I think about this is sort of the classic nature nurture debate. And you all probably know the nature nurture debate, where there have been different philosophers and then eventually different psychologists that would come along and go, you know, is it nature? Is it your genes predict everything about who you are? Or is it nurture? Is it how you were raised, your environment, your culture, how people parented you, that type of thing? You know, which one is it? And the reality of it is, I still remember in my graduate course in developmental psychology, how much my professor hit this home. You cannot separate the two. So the question, which one is it, is just an erroneous question, because nature and nurture are constantly interacting, even in utero. Like he started out in the beginning of the semester talking about how different environmental circumstances in utero affect how the genetic makeup of an embryo replicates and develops in utero. Okay. Another way of thinking about it is very simply, let's just talk about a basic nutrition thing, that there is more brain growth in a human being in the first year of life. So after birth, in the first year of life. So the way that babies are nourished with quality milk, whether that be breast milk or quality formula in that first year of life, that environmental influence of intake of good quality milk is definitely going to influence brain development. If that brain grows more in that first year of life, wouldn't good nutrition make a lot of sense? Wouldn't poor nutrition make a lot of sense in how it could be damaging? Then add to that, in the first year of life, babies that are getting good nutrition and they're getting, whether it be from other children or they're getting it from a parent or guardian, lots and lots of stimulation, lots of holding and skin contact, lots of playing and talking to them, singing with them, dancing with them, playing toys with them, making eye contact. I still remember my son Forrest. I didn't know he was ready for peekaboo, and I had his little diaper cloth laying on him when he was a baby, and he pulled up the diaper cloth and he pulled it down and he went, ah! And laughed at me, and I was like, oh, you're ready for peekaboo. You know, it was like that kind of interaction type of thing. Wouldn't it make sense that if you had the money and the resources for high quality nutrition and high quality stimulation, that is going to be a larger, healthier, smarter brain after that first year of life than if there's poor nutrition and poor stimulation? Poor stimulation, sort of neglect, like leaving kid in crib all the time. Make some sense? Nature, nurture? You can't separate them? Okay. That's my spiel on that today. So again, I've been conceptualizing fat talk as a way of getting short-term reinforcement or short-term gain or short-term reassurance about one's insecurities. But we definitely know from the scientific literature that longer-term use of this is bad for individuals. It's associated with poor body image. It's associated with depression. It's associated with poor self-esteem. And then oftentimes it's associated with very poor self-care or even hurtful care, like an eating disorder. So very punishing kinds of eating behavior. And so in that way, I kind of think about it a bit like an addiction, that there are some women that are kind of locked in, like, I can't stop doing this because I like that short-term gain. But then in the long run, it's really creating harm. Okay. And again, this kind of goes back to that previous definition that we talked about a minute ago. So does fat talk help one feel better about feeling bad about oneself? Okay. So we're taking that sort of low self-esteem kind of thing within oneself, processing with another person, and then at least temporarily feeling better. Okay. And then there's simply some fat talk stuff that I find funny. And here's what has happened in my evolution in finding this stuff to be funny. I usually find it to be funny, and then I feel guilty about it because the funny, I think, is kind of reinforcing it. So in this situation, she's saying this towel must be very heavy. Yeah, that's funny. We will also get into, I'm not going to go into detail about this, but we will get into some linguistics. And one of the things that I really enjoyed when I was doing research and writing this is I like interdisciplinary work. And so I enjoyed reading about biology. I enjoyed reading about linguistics and language. I enjoyed reading about family influences and cultural influences. I enjoyed reading about politics and writing about that kind of stuff. But we're going to get into a little bit of fat talk definitely falls into a category of feminine language in how we women are raised to learn how to talk with one another versus how boys and men are raised to talk with one another. So as one example, women in our conversations, one of the goals is oftentimes intimacy and bonding with one another. Guys, on the other hand, when they engage in banter or ribbing one another, they're oftentimes in very playful, competitive language, as an example. Another thing that we women do, as an example, in the way that we are raised to talk, is we are raised to be very empathetic, to listen to other people's emotions more than boys and men are raised. And then another example I want to give, because I think this is valuable for some of you women in this class to take into your futures. So years ago, Madeleine Albright was the Secretary of State before Hillary Rodham Clinton became Secretary of State. I just want to pause here for a second on the Hillary Rodham Clinton. She has never been Mrs. Clinton. She has never been Hillary Clinton. To this day, her legal name is Rodham. However, because of her husband being in politics ahead of her, all of their PR people, their campaign managers, really encouraged her, because the Hillary Rodham seemed too feminist, that she didn't take her husband's name. And so they gave her her husband's name and started referring to her as Hillary Clinton or Mrs. Clinton. So being defined by her relationship to a man. Got it? Okay. So Madeleine Albright, she was the one that wore all the different pins. She would wear the pins as she would go into the negotiations with different diplomats, and the pins would convey the mood for the day. Madeleine Albright was also known for being very good at using humor in her negotiations with diplomats of different countries and that type of thing. And so she was just really good at bonding with people and working with people. I saw Madeleine Albright give a graduation speech for one of those all-female colleges. It was like Wesley or something like that. And in her speech to these women, this all-female school, bachelor's degree graduating women, her recommendation, and I found it, like, at first I was kind of like, what? And then as she went on, it was like, oh, now I get this. She told the women, get out there and interrupt men when you're talking in the boardroom. Or I have found this really interesting in faculty meetings. And we've got some really tough women in my department, a lot of women that I very much admire in my department, but I've watched it in action. Women will be talking, men will interrupt and take the floor. They will take over the conversation. This happens all the time. Once you start paying attention to this stuff, you can't unsee it. Another thing that, and see, women find that interrupting somebody is very rude. Okay. But Madeleine Albright's suggestion was get out there and interrupt, get your voice heard. Another thing that I have seen in faculty meetings, and again, my department's quite liberal and quite woke, and we've got some very strong, very productive women in my department, unlike other departments and other universities. But another thing that I've seen happen at times is a woman will voice a really good idea. And then it gets talked over, you know, people start discussing. And then a man says the very same idea. And then everybody's like, ooh. And I've learned over time, and we have each other's backs, to do this thing. Like, let's say Pam said this thing, and there's discussion, discussion, discussion. And then Doug says the same thing, and people are like, ooh. To go, Pam said that 5 minutes ago. You know, give her credit, bring back around that credit for that type of thing. So one of the things we're going to be paying attention to in this is what is feminine language, and Fat Talk rolls right into it. It fits right into it. And there's some really beautiful, wonderful things about feminine language, but there's some really potentially damaging things like that. Never interrupt, it's rude. Okay. I was raised, you don't interrupt. You don't interrupt adults. You definitely don't interrupt men, as an example. So when I learned about this stuff, it's kind of empowering. Okay, we've talked a little bit about some of the consequences of fat talk, and we'll go in that. There's a whole chapter on that stuff, so I won't spend too much time here today. Oh, okay. This was really interesting for me to do research on, and I want to spend a little time today, but I want us to spend more time later on in the semester. So I read a bunch of political science work on this stuff, and one of the things that went down in 2008, and I realized that you all were young and probably do not remember a whole lot of this. Do you all remember when Sarah Palin was running for vice presidential candidate? Allison saying yes. Anybody else kind of remembering? Okay. So the political scientists view this, and I think it's really interesting, as a natural experiment. So we had Sarah Palin running on the Republican ticket as vice president, and we had Hillary Rodham Clinton running on the Democratic ticket for president. And as a natural experiment, it was really interesting. And keep in mind, she did not get elected in the final ticket. Barack Obama was the Democrat leader running for president in 2008, and he became the first African-American president. But in that interesting natural experiment, the US vote was not a woman. We're not going to vote in a woman to any of these roles, which is why, and I met, not personally, but I started my girl crush on Kamala Harris when I was at the Women's March. And I wrote about her speech in the Women's March somewhere later on in the book. But it was at that point in time, I was like, who is this person? And I just really like how she speaks. And then I've been kind of following her with the girl crush ever since. And when she got elected as vice president, like it just meant so much to me and to so many people, especially girls of color and whatnot. Okay. Now, Sarah Palin, one of her nicknames that was given to her as by a female reporter was Caribou Barbie. And I remember hearing about Caribou Barbie, and at the time finding it to be humorous. The more I researched and I read up about it, the more mad I got about this term, because it was a way of cutting a woman down, okay? Sexualizing her, making her seem like a stupid Barbie doll. And again, there's a lot of stuff that she said that I didn't like. I didn't like her politics, but I could see why she was charming, and she could speak well, and she had a sense of humor, and she could deliver the humor well. I want you to pay attention to this picture down here. This is Sarah Palin. This is the back of her legs and her ankles. Again, body parts, which I can't stand when the media does this. But look at this young man. What's his expression looking like? Are these young men kind of in awe of her? But where's he looking as it's conveyed in this picture? He's down in the stage below. She's up on the stage. They've shot this picture in a way like he's looking up her skirt. Okay. Now let's take a look at, this is when she was a senator of New York. This was before she became Secretary of State. And here's the caption that was written about her after she spoke that day on the Senate floor. There was cleavage on display Wednesday afternoon on C-SPAN. Do you think she purposely dressed that day to look sexual and to look objectified with her cleavage? And then this begs the question, and I mean, this happens all the time, like on the red carpet, where the reporters are always asking the women about their dress and their hair and all that kind of stuff, but they're not asking the men the same question. And some of the female actors, they push back on that kind of stuff. We're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't at times. Like, are we supposed to take, if we've got feminine features in our bodies, and are we supposed to hide them? Are we supposed, if we display them, that's too risky, right? Because then we're setting ourselves up like Emma Watson to be sexualized and criticized. But then if we hide that which makes our bodies look feminine, that's weird too, isn't it? Yeah. And in my mind, that was a very professional dress for her, but look at how it got portrayed. And then if we take this a step further, I'm not going to go too much into this today, but I was absolutely horrified when I read on the research of this. Pornification. You can do this at home. I have done this. But if you type in the name of male politicians on Google and the word pornography, you get nothing. If you type in the name of Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, type in Hillary Rodham's daughter, Chelsea Clinton, in the words pornography, you will not believe what you find. And they didn't pose for pornography. There are people dressed up like them, dressed up like them, or portraying them in these pornographic images. And it's like, to me, in my mind, it's like taking slut shaming to an exponential level, because it is totally taking these women that have other professions and other crafts. They're politicians, they're comedians, they're actors, they're writers, whatever, diplomats, and it is pornifying them in a way. It is absolutely horrific, and posting that up on media where other people can view it. Okay. Horrible stuff. And again, how are women in politics being viewed? We got AOC here. I'm a fan of her. Boy, there are people that absolutely hate her and think she is mean and rude. And she's just very outspoken. I mean, she speaks her mind and she takes on challenges. We got Nancy Pelosi here. I tell a story in the book when I went to Girls State, and I'm very shy by nature. I'm high energy, so you all wouldn't know this as a teacher, but I'm very shy. And when I was at Girls State, I got elected to be the Speaker of the House, and I had to operate kind of like the virtual United Nations, but Girls State was running government. So I was elected Speaker of the House at that point in time, and that made me like, I had to actually speak. I had to like gather information and speak and kind of, anyways. And at the time, Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. There was never a female Speaker of the House until Nancy Pelosi. So when she moved into that role, I was like in awe. Like, oh my gosh, here we are in US government for the first time ever. We have a woman in that role. And obviously, you all know that she has a lot of enemies, Okay. We're going to talk, you all are going to talk about this, the different functions of Fat Talk and why we think why it exists. We're going to have fun today. We've got a couple more minutes. I've got a girl crush on Eliza Schlesinger. She is really, really funny. She has some fantastic gender observations in her stand-up and in her humor. So let's watch her fat talk.
Girls get cold easily because we're not allowed to eat as much as we want in one sitting. Trying to get another girl to admit that she's hungry between two girls is like a standoff. You can't admit you're hungry, that's admitting weakness. It's admitting defeat. Are you hungry? Me neither. So. Are you hungry? Nope, I ate last week, so. I could do this all day. I'm chewing on my tongue. Feels good enough, that's fine. Eventually one, usually the smaller one, will concede. I'll go with you. If you're hungry, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. Subtext, I'll watch you get fat.
Okay, so the line, no, I'm not hungry, I ate last week. That's fat talk, but it cracks me up. So first time I saw that and I laughed at it, and then I felt guilty, and then I just kept laughing. I thought it was hilarious. Okay, eventually we're going to go into gender and fat talk, race and fat talk, different research methodologies that we've used in our lab that other people have used in their lab. We did some population-based surveys and some research on what this looks like in adults in age and race represented people in the US. Again, some more research methodologies. Oh, Missy, let's go back to Missy. We got to listen to Missy's got good body image. This is her at the Super Bowl. Listen to the words of her song. I think many of you probably might be familiar with the song. Missy's got good body image. Okay. All right. I think, yeah, that's all I want to present today. Again, I'm going to stop my share. I wasn't going to try to hit all of that stuff because it kind of covers every single chapter of the book. And that's what you all are going to be doing. So let me get my gallery picture here. Any comments, thoughts, questions? Do you want to hear more suggestions for your presentations and how I'd like to see that? One of the, I've already had a conversation with one student about this. One of the things that I don't want you to do, which I just did today, so don't do what I did. I don't want you hiding behind PowerPoints. I don't want you just like the PowerPoint's up there and you're in your little box and you're kind of hiding behind it and you're just talking and reading what's on your PowerPoints. I want it to be much more discussion oriented. And so one idea is I want you to keep your PowerPoint presentation very short, kind of short and to the point. If you, let's say you're going through your PowerPoint and you're posing a question to the group, do what I just did. Unshare the PowerPoint so that you can see the gallery, and it's still an artificial classroom, but it is much better than the classroom where there are a couple of heads in a PowerPoint. Okay. Pose the question to the group, see if we get some discussion. I really would like to see people participating and discussing it. I don't want the student presenter to have to carry the load. I want us all to carry the load. And then if you, like, let's say you ask a question in the middle of the PowerPoint and you've got, some more PowerPoint slides, and you go back and share, and that's fine. I really want you to try to present at least one research study and go through the methodology to kind of, highlight the science of how they asked a question and answered a question. I really would like for you to think about some provocative questions to ask the group. An example might be when you cover the waist to hip ratio, the evolutionary science stuff. How many of you dislike this? It's like, and I would say, me, I dislike this. But the science is just like study after study after study has demonstrated this. Like you can't, in my mind, you can't deny it. So really trying to generate discussion. Does that make sense? I will encourage everybody from here on out. I know some of you don't have the bandwidth, and I understand that, to try to show your video so that it looks like there really are people in the class, because that can be really helpful when you're presenting, to sort of see that, yeah, there's people there, they're listening, they're nodding their head, they're thumbing up, that kind of thing. So any thoughts or questions about where y'all are headed with that stuff? I have found the reflections to be very interesting. So thank you all for that. Yeah, you all came at it in all kinds of different angles, but many of you kind of talking about how reading it, what you liked, what you didn't like, how your own histories played into some of the stuff that you read about that. So that was been really enjoyable. I look forward to doing that all throughout the semester. Questions, comments? Nope. Okay. All right. Good to see everybody. We'll start presentations on Thursday. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.